Tosca Bruno van Vijvijk, and then Rebecca, please. I direct the Transnational NGO Initiative in the Moynihan Institute on the 3rd floor here in Maxwell. We focus, I see a few faces that I think I haven't seen before. I also see some of my students. That makes me really happy. If you haven't heard of the Transnational NGO Initiative before, we focus on the governance, leadership, and effectiveness of transnationally operating NGOs. We've done it for the last 10 to 12 years. We do a lot of research, both academic as well as practitioner-oriented research. We engage in education, offer courses, but also have visitors like Ken Berger today for our students' benefit, and we do a lot of work with practitioners around senior leadership development and around leading and managing change and helping those NGOs reflect on and learn from how they lead and manage big organizational change processes. Some of our research is on digital NGO platforms. So, before let me first introduce Ken briefly, and then I will also make sure that I mention a couple of other opportunities you have. Those of you who are here, as well as those you can share that with people who couldn't make it today because you have conflicting coursework that didn't allow you to be here today. So this morning we interviewed two short conversational interviews with Ken Berger that will be on our website of the TNGO Initiative within the next week or so. One is focused on the issues that Ken is working on as a leader, and one is focused on career advice that he was willing to pass along. This talk, as you see, is being recorded, so will be on our YouTube channel probably in 4 to 5 business days. And this afternoon at 3 o'clock, if you can't get enough of Ken, then at 3 o'clock he offers an informal career-focused session in 204B Maxwell, so organized by Career Services and ourselves. So lots of opportunities to interact more. So Ken Berger is the managing director and chief educator, so he feels quite at home here in academia, at Algorithm, and he will explain a lot more what Algorithm is about. He has explained to me it's a data science social enterprise company that enables small to medium-sized nonprofits and NGOs, both here in the US and in overseas in other countries, to engage in impact measurement in a way that they would never normally have the resources and technical knowledge and skills to do so. It's democratizing data-driven decision-making for impact. Until 2 months, no, that's not true.
6.
Until 6 months ago, he was the CEO and president of Charity Navigator. And most of you in the room probably know that Charity Navigator is the worldwide, is the largest and therefore very influential web-based rating intermediary for domestic nonprofits here in the US as well as for international US NGOs. And he'll tell you more about these catchy numbers around that signal influence, so I will not do that. So Ken and I have worked together for about 5-ish kind of years. Some of the students in my course on governance and global civil society have also engaged in some of the beta testing for the methodology that Charity Navigator under Ken's leadership has been developing on results measurement and results reporting. I have been one of those, a large group of informal, quote-unquote, advisors to Charity Navigator, although it's been a fairly informal engagement. So that is his profile. And before that, he worked for 30 years here in the US in human service nonprofits. He'll tell more about that. Homeless people, poor people in general, and health related services. So he was a practitioner, joined as a leader this rating agency, Charity Navigator, and now has made his next career into Algorithm. So over to you.
Thanks.
The battle for the soul of the social sector.
Winning the battle.
Winning.
Okay. So I'm going to stand just so that I can see you all. So I really want to thank Tosca, as she's really been incredibly helpful over the years for me and for Charity Navigator to make sure that we were on the ground listening to what really matters to nonprofits. So she's been invaluable help over the years. I can't thank her enough. I also want to apologize for 3 things in advance. One is I talk fast, and I'm sorry. The second is that I may use terms that you're not familiar with. Feel free to stop me if I start getting into charity speak. And the third is, and it was already occurred this morning, I come from the Loud family, so I suspect that the doors will be fully closed very soon so that the people on the other side of the hall will not hear me. So I hope you will accept that in advance. As long as you're willing to tolerate that. So why am I calling this a battle? Why am I choosing words of conflict when it comes to the NGO sector or the nonprofit sector or the charity sector or the social sector? Why do I, and those of course should not be ors, there are differences, but why do I call this a battle? I call it a battle because I think there's some pivotal things going on right now that are of that severity and of that nature that need to be exposed. And typically the culture of what I'm going to call the social sector, and I'll define it, is to avoid conflict, is to avoid really facing the profound things that are going on. And it's literally a battle that I think is so important. It gets to the very core of what the social sector is, the soul of what the sector should be, aspires to be, wants to be, and it currently is not from what I see. What is the social sector? Well, the social sector is meant to be an inclusive term of all organizations that are involved in trying to help, to do social good, or to create social value. What is social value? By the way, this glossary thing is going to stop very soon, but I just want to get it out there. Social value is meaningful and lasting change in communities and people's lives. Meaningful and lasting change in communities and people's lives. So the social sector can include nonprofits or NGOs. It can include social enterprises. Some would even argue it includes, governmental departments on occasion that are involved in social programming, as well as, foundations and so forth, corporations that are supporting the social good in some fashion. So it's supposed to be an umbrella term about trying to do good. So I think that this battle is largely unseen. And as I have said to my 19-year-old daughter and my wife when they tell me they're not interested in politics, I say to them that that is a political decision. And even if you don't engage in politics, if you put yourself on the sidelines, that is a very political decision and has profound ramifications. The same is the case when it comes to this battle. If you're not aware of it, if you're unconscious about it, or if you want to ignore it, you're still playing a part in it. And by the way, for 30 years I was an ignorant fool to it, so I was very much a part of the not knowing about it, so I'm not judging anybody for it. So, my presentation is in 2 parts, 20 minutes for each roughly, with warnings when I get to the 5 minutes for 45 minutes, I get a little extra just in case, and then question and answer at the end. The first part, the first 20 minutes, is what I call the bummer. The bummer. The bummer is the sorry state of things, the sorry state of where the sector is today and the challenges, the battle it faces, and who are the players in this battle. So by the end of the first 20 minutes, you may want to leave, but please do not wait. Wait, because we're going to win. And so you got to wait for the second 20 minutes for that. A way out of this morass and this sadness. And so let's begin. And hopefully this doohickey will work. So there are a number of things that thought leaders say that you read in the literature are the greatest battle or challenges, if you want to use that term, that the sector faces. The first one that we hear about is that we have an explosion of nonprofits. We have 1.5 million and growing, the largest nonprofit sector in the history of the world. There's too many, it's inefficient, we're bumping into each other, and we can't thrive and reach scale because they're proliferating like bunnies. The second theme, government is imploding. There's more and more talk of cutting back on government and its support and other funders, and with the competition, It's harder and harder to raise the dollars, and it's the changing views of donors, younger donors with different views about how they want to give, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've got a money problem. We've got a resource problem. Then, of course, you have, I'm going to channel Dan Pallotta, my colleague, that we're just not paying the CEOs enough money. Gosh darn it. And by the way, we're so focused on overhead, we're measuring the wrong things, we're prioritizing the wrong things. That's what you hear. There are other things you could add. Does that sound like some fair challenges? You've heard about that here at Maxwell and so forth? Okay. Well, I'm not in any way denying that there isn't truth to some degree or another to some of these, and others less so, but that's for another day. Or you can ask me questions. But I think this is the greatest challenge that the nonprofit sector or the NGO and the social sector faces. This was an article, you can get it for free online, by a guy named David Hunter called The End of Charity. And he got in a lot of trouble, and this phrase got him in a whole lot of trouble. And I just want to explain, I want to unpack this for a second. David was not saying that the majority of nonprofits, he's not saying they're not doing good. He's not saying that. He's saying that the vast majority of them do not have evidence or research or data to prove it. So they may be doing good, but they don't know how much. They haven't got a measurable way of defining that. We have a $2 trillion sector, the largest sector in the history of the world, and the experience I had at Charity Navigator only supports what David is saying. 95% or more of nonprofits, of social sector organizations, I would add many social enterprises, don't have this data. This is profound. This is unbelievable. This is scary bad. Other than that, it's fine. So in a situation like this, who wins? Who gets the money? Who gets the resources? The answer is he, and it's typically a he, who does the best storytelling wins. He who does the best marketing wins. Fundraising is very important for NGOs, of course, and getting investors to support you in a social enterprise. But absent evidence, absent data, what is the classic way that we raise money? We tell a story, a granular story, a heart-wrenching story. It's very important. I don't want to take away the value of storytelling. But storytelling without data that stands behind it that shows that that story is happening every day is a meaningless story in the end, because it doesn't mean just that one, that's great what you did for that family. But how do we know that you're doing that every day? So if the marketing is the way to win in this environment, so who are the people who have the resources to do the best marketing? So here's something that I didn't know for 30 years at doing direct service. I didn't know this. Then I came to Charity Navigator and I began to do some research and read some stuff that came out from the Urban Institute, and I learned something. So I want to start with a thought, and for those of you who heard me yesterday, forgive me, but a thought experiment. You've heard of the Occupy Wall Street movement? So regardless of your personal politics, they are upset because 1% of the American population controls 43% of the nation's resources. That's why they're mad. Now, here's the thought experiment. Imagine if they control twice as much. Imagine if that 1% of the American population controlled 86% of this nation's resources. Do you think that more people would be mad? That would be the end of virtually the end of the middle class. I think more people would be mad, right? They'd be mad. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the nonprofit sector today. Thank you very much. 1% of the nonprofits in this country receive 86% of that $2 trillion every year. 1%. 99% the remainder. It's a stunning statistic. And so when we ask the question, who is able to garner the resources to do the best marketing and to perpetuate this system we have, it is that 1%. And it's not just about marketing. It's about many things. Who has the money to have people to go to conferences? Who has the money to drive and write articles in the Chronicle of Philanthropy and influence leadership and where the sector is going? Who writes the text? Who has the money to support the textbooks and everything else? Who? It's the 1%. And so, in my experience in 30 years of working in the nonprofit sector and then coming to Charity Navigator, it was like going from the trenches to the 50,000-foot level, going from the 99% to the 1%, because a lot of the organizations I worked for were small. And I was exposed for the first time in my career to thought leaders, much more than I was before. I didn't have time to read any of that stuff when I was in the trenches. And I found them to be brilliant. And I found them to have great ideas. And I found that the majority of those ideas were useless in practice because they were talking to the 1%. Their ideas were great for the 1%. But when it came to the trenches in the real world of the majority of NGOs, they were irrelevant. They did not connect. Okay. Are we moving in that bummer direction well so far? So far the bummer's coming along? All right. We also have the Occupy Foundation problem. 50 foundations in this country out of 82,000 give out half the money. There's a tremendous concentration there. So this interconnection between the 1% of NGOs and the 1% of what are supposed to be the innovative and most creative funders is very strong. And these big foundations typically will give to the bigger guys, or at least the mid-sized guys, in the sector. And so there's also that dynamic that drives problems. And then we have government. Government. Now, government, when I was in an NGO, running NGOs or supporting NGOs, it was a little known fact to the general public, but for most human service NGOs, especially the bigger ones, 90%, 95% of your money can come from government. People think that people think it's $300 billion that comes into the sector each year. That's the smallest bucket of money of all. That's private contributions. Remember I said $2 trillion? Who's the biggest funder of all? Government. 600 to 700 billion. More than double what private contributions give. More than individuals. More than foundations by far. It is government. And so for those that are libertarians and want to take government out of the formula for the future, I wish you the very best of luck. But be that as it may, the reality of government funding includes everything from they pay late, they dumb down programs, they cut programs based on political whim, they create behemoth programs, and of course, most importantly, they are probably the leading driver of counting things, counting activities to show off and brag, which lends itself to creaming because you want to have big numbers. So you don't care about quality, you care about volume. So government certainly can be a bummer. And then we have the individual donor. And at Charity Navigator, we spend a lot of time trying to interest and cultivate and educate and guide the individual donor. The mission of Charity Navigator is to be a guide to intelligent giving, and we did this by rating the performance of charities. And so the premise behind Charity Navigator was people want data. Now, people have debated the value of Charity Navigator's data, and I'm happy to talk about that if you want. But the basic notion of that traditional charitable giving is heart-based, and we don't want to get rid of the heart, but we want to use the noggin, the head, and marry those two together, and that was part of the goal of Charity Navigator. But the challenge, all the research, there's a group called Hope Consulting that did supposedly some of the best research on donor behavior in the past 15 years or so. They did a study called Money for Good. You can check it out online. And based upon that study, they came to the conclusion that donors typically fall into 6 groups. And I'm not going to belabor this, in my remaining 5 minutes of bummer. But essentially, what they learned was that roughly 15% of donors actually say that they want to donate based on impact, based on results, based on outcomes. And just to add to the bummer, when you actually looked at who actually goes looking for it, it's only 1 to 2% of those donors. So even though 15% claim they do it, only 1 or 2% actually do. So that's got to be a bummer. If the biggest challenge is to measure stuff, and the donors don't seem to be looking for it or caring about it, that's got to be a problem too. And then we come to the people being served. And you've probably heard this before, this observation. In the for-profit sector, the customer, if they don't like the product, they walk with their feet. And the feedback mechanism to the organization is very clear. They're not buying my product anymore. In the nonprofit sector, in the NGO sector, typically, I'm not talking social enterprise right now, the typical driver of funding is not the person who receives the service. So you're not really hearing from the person receiving the service. The flow of information is disconnected from the people being served. So you don't really know where they fit into the system. And then there's a whole litany of other things the nonprofits will say why they don't want to measure stuff. Well, I'm going to get naked and tell the true story of my measurement, and all the other organizations out there aren't going to do it and see how bad it is. And I don't want to waste resources on it. I want to just do the work. I know I'm doing good work. Those damn measures of yours, they reduce my organization. They oversimplify. You know what Einstein said, for goodness sake, you could measure the wrong thing, and you know, some things, and I don't have any money for it. Where am I supposed to get the money to do this? Are you kidding me? I mean, come on, get real. And my board doesn't really care about it. You've already proven my donors don't care about it. And by the way, we don't have the profit motive here. We're supposed to have the mission motive. That's all very well and good. But here's what I know as the CEO for 30 years. If I want to increase my salary, I got to get my organization bigger. Doesn't matter about the mission. I got to get more funds coming in here. I got to get more government contracts. So I would argue that in many cases, it's not the mission motive, but the growth motive trumps the mission motive for many nonprofits. They want to get bigger, and that's how the leadership is rewarded. And second to last but not least, government as a monitor of the nonprofits is tepid at best. They do about 4,000, the IRS, the federal tax authority and monitoring body, does about 4,000 audits a year out of those 1.5 million nonprofits. And a lot of the audits they do is because somebody says, hey, there's a thief over there. And I believe that there's a thimbleful of monitoring relative to what's needed out there. Yesterday, in the Chronicle of Philanthropy came out with a whole issue all about the fact, it starts with a headline, 1 out of 3 Americans have a lack of faith in the charitable sector, in the nonprofit sector, and teases that out. But there's also an article from Diana Aviv, who just stepped down as the head of the independent sector, is one of the largest trade associations for nonprofits. And she said that there's a tremendous need for more enforcement by government. How we're going to do that in our divisive current environment where nobody wants to talk to anybody or make a decision about anything, I don't know, but we need more government monitoring. So then when we come to the measurement tools that are out there themselves, okay, so all right, Berger, you say we're going to measure in spite of all of these things. Well, what kind of measurement tools do we have out there? Well, there are a lot of people that are promoting tools that are very much in sort of the medical model, the physical model. They're concerned about dosage. Everybody has to get the same dose of something. But human beings are pesky. And human beings are different. And one person's dosage may have to be different for somebody else's dosage, and they may need something else. The dosage is something else. So our basic systems of how we're proposing measurement often are not working. And as a result of that, we take snapshots of the past, like with randomized control trials. We look back and take a snapshot and think that that's going to be real, timely, and useful. Maybe sometimes we can get to results, but we almost never really get to what are the problems in the agency and help them to know in advance what might occur if they do a service, and help them with prescribing ways to do better. It's virtually not there. I think that might be the end. Oh, wait, there's one more bummer slide. Okay, so social business. Now, some people say, so one way we can solve all those problems is social business, social enterprise. The for-profit sector, the marvel of the for-profit sector is going to solve all these problems. It's so great. The business sense, the savvy, we're going to solve it all. So what we're saying is the nonprofit sector was created in part because of market failure, that these were things that the market could not solve. And now the market's going to solve them. We fixed it. Somehow, now, there will not be market failure. Very interesting concept. Second of all, you have now the profit motive. And so what you're saying is we're going to do better. We're going to make sure that we have these two things now, profit and social value. And we're always going to have social value first. We're not going to, the profit motive, we're going to keep that as a secondary driver. We're going to do that. We can be sure we're going to do that. I didn't know what a social entrepreneur was, and I was asked to speak on this a couple years ago, so I read up on it, and then I came to the conclusion that I was a social entrepreneur. And then I realized that you could drive a truck through it, the definition of what is a social entrepreneur. I think that we're still in the very early stages of defining this stuff, and so we have to be careful about that. And when you actually go out there and look at, somebody asked me this morning, so like exactly how many social enterprises are really considered models? Not many, not many. Even when we look in the world of microfinance, we're seeing that there's a lot of exploitation and abuse that has occurred since the Grameen Bank really began to drive this. Mohammed Yunus, doing some great work, but hey, there's a lot to be worked out here. And then there's the other dirty little secret that is often not discussed. We think that this is all going to be new money, magic new money. Well, the reality is, I think that we're also going to be taking some of the money that philanthropists would traditionally give to the NGOs, and now we're going to transfer it over there. So there's going to be a potential war between the two sides. And I already said that, so that's redundant. Now I think we're done. Oh, one more. So I had a colleague that went to a meeting where they had social impact bonds discussion and a pay-for-success kind of an exercise that they were pursuing. And he came back to me and he said, you know what? Those investors, those guys from that bank and this other group here, they're a bunch of sharks. They don't give a damn about social value. They just want to, this is a new opportunity for them to maximize their profit. They're looking for 70, 80% profit. So we better be careful who we let into this pool of social enterprise and these kind of new models. And the other thing that happens is when we do some meaningful work, foundations and otherwise, we often don't share it. We keep it close. So the foundation has all of these reports from program officers that may be some learning on models that work or don't work, and we all keep it a secret because we don't want to embarrass the NGOs or ourselves in the process. We don't want to get naked. So, here's the solution. That's the end of the bummer. I went a few minutes over. I apologize. It's over now. We're going to fix it now. Now we come to the solution. So, back in 2008, the Hewlett Foundation came out with a report, and this was the ideal solution. And the basic idea was somehow what they defined as the key players were going to be doing something with meaningful information, that there was going to be this supply of meaningful information. Nonprofits were going to supply it. Intermediaries like Charity Navigator were going to assess it. And then donors were going to use it. And once this ideal world happened with meaningful information, the ultimate goal would be that the highest performing nonprofits would get more money. And we would change the world and the end. Now, I could stop right there, but that would be wrong and bad. And so I was staring at this for a lot of years, and I said, there's a couple things missing here, at least two. One, the Hewlett Foundation forgot about the Hewlett Foundation. They forgot about the funding community. And what is their responsibility in all of this? They need to supply the resources for this supposed meaningful information. And what we see in the foundation world oftentimes today is that they will ask now, everybody's asking for outcomes, right? So I'm saying that nobody's doing it, but everybody's asking for it. How many of those foundations are willing to pay for it? How many of those foundations say, you know what? We're not going to give you 5% overhead, we're going to give you 15% because you've got to build these systems to be able to measure what matters most. And we're going to train you, and we're going to help you. Nope. But that's where we're going. We're going to win this battle. And then the other, which we've already mentioned, is the people being served. We need to empower them. We need to engage them. We need to know what they're thinking about how we're doing and whether it's meaningful or not to them. Now, and then of course, we also have social business. Social business as another player in all of this, so we can also drive more money to them. The other thing is that these institutional funders need to get on board, and rather than every institutional funder having their own standards of how you report and their own standards of what is an outcome and telling you what the outcome needs to be in advance, we need to come to some consensus on standards together and make it more efficient so that it's not a royal pain and yet another burden on the nonprofits. And we also need to not just do surveys of the people served, we want to tell them. They need to get something back rather than just being asked to answer something and not know what the organization's doing to change, to respond to the feedback they're giving. So now we fixed it. So now let me get into the weeds of this a little bit. So when I started Charity Navigator, I went on a listening tour to find out what is meaningful information. Since that apparently is what Hewlett says, what is meaningful information that you need to know about for measuring these organizations? And I spoke to a lot of people, and I proposed to you that there are 4 things. Now, what I'm about to say, people use other words, they say it a different way, but it's basically these 4 things. And if you forget everything else that I say to you today, I want you to please remember my little red tricycle. You can forget everything else, but remember this red tricycle. Okay, this is the key to everything. This is how we win the battle, this little red tricycle. So there it is. Okay, it's got 3 wheels, right? First wheel, big wheel. Results, outcomes, big wheel. It's the most important thing of all. It's why these organizations exist. Meeting the mission, big deal, big, big. Then we have 2 little wheels. 1, the finances of the organization. Finances actually matter. There are some people, like Dan Pallotta, that say, all we should care about is the big wheel. First of all, I don't see many people driving unicycles, but I believe that for an organization to survive in the long term, you need to look at this, because if you don't, today's gangbuster results could be tomorrow's bankruptcy. And so if you don't keep your eye on anybody who's a CEO of a nonprofit, if you're not looking at finance and making sure that you have best practice or good practice in finance, you're going down. And then governance. I can't tell you how many times when I was a Charity Navigator, we'd run into an organization that got 3 friends on the board. They ripped off the whole freaking place. There's no independent board members, and the place is going down the tubes. It's basically a money machine for the leadership. Or there's just no accountability. They go blind. They're not paying attention. It's a social club, and the CEO and the leadership bring it down the tubes. Or you have, at the other extreme, micromanaging boards of these wealthy guys who figured out how to make a lot of money, and they think they know better than everybody. They think the nonprofit guys are a bunch of bleeding hearts, and they impose their will, and they destroy the nonprofit too. So balancing and doing the right in governance is also important. And if you don't have the right governance, today's gangbuster results can be tomorrow's embezzlement scandal and falling down the tubes. And then last but not least, Yoda. No, not Yoda. Capable leadership. He happens to be, even though he had problems, I like Yoda. But the point is, there is this other element, which is if you do not have a leader with integrity, ethics, passionate, data-driven, common sense, and I could go on, listening, humility, there are critical qualities. And if you don't have that, there's nobody steering the tricycle, there's nobody pumping the wheels, there's nobody helping with the vision and bringing everybody together for that vision. You've got to have the right people in charge. That is my little red tricycle. That is how you take that other thing from Hewlett and you make it real. So that's still pretty vague. This is another way of looking at it. I don't really have the time to go over this, but I will say one thing about this way of looking at it. So it has all the elements of the tricycle, except here you have a flow. And if you think of an organization that's young and it's trying to do the right thing, it begins with capable leadership, keeping its eye on the financial ball, building a good governance structure, and over time being data-driven, they finally get to a point where they can begin to measure what matters most to meet their mission and measure outcomes. And then someday, perhaps, but usually not, most nonprofits will never get to impact in this definition, even though my colleagues at Algorithm use that term. They will get to high performance. Impact in this model means you can rule out all other causation. That means randomized control trials, and even then it's questionable and it costs millions of dollars. We don't, as a sector, need to get there. We need to get here. We need to get here. If there's evidence-based research that we can learn from and model on, great. But we need to get here.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Max.
The other two things are, so as an organization evolves, there's less and less risk because there's more and more evidence of results. There are two other boxes that are not on here, but I want to mention them because they're very important. Over here is an organization where the majority of the sector is, I call it the clueless organization. They're not even on the radar. They're not even thinking about this stuff. A lot of nonprofits are over here. And then, never to be forgotten, the ultimate box over here, which we don't talk about much, but I think is a big problem, it's called scoundrels and thieves. And there's a lot of them. And typically the thought leaders will tell you it's rare, it's very unusual, and I tell you they're wrong. All the anecdotal information, there's not that much hard evidence. There are a couple of studies that say billions of dollars are wasted each year on fraud, but it is a big problem, and we don't talk about it enough, we don't do enough about it. That's a place where Diana, Aviv, and I agree. We have a big problem, and we got to get serious about the scoundrels and thieves. Okay, so social investors, donors. So remember I told you that the donors, only 1% of them actually look for this stuff? Well, here's a hopeful sign. The study that came out yesterday from the Chronicle corroborates the research from Money for Good. 90% of donors, I think the Chronicle was 80% or something, 90%, the most important thing of all for most donors is the effectiveness of organizations. That's what they say. So, and I mentioned, but only 1% get it. So how can we explain this disconnect? Why is there hope? I think because donors are making a rational decision. Remember I said in the beginning that most nonprofits have no data on their results? So wouldn't it then be rational for most donors to not go looking for it? Because it's not there, unless you have program officers in a big foundation or you're going to go build a study for yourself. So isn't it a rational decision if in most cause areas, for most donors, they can't do it? Charity Navigator was the same thing. They were looking for proxies, even if they might have at some point been doing some harm in the process, but they're looking for something. Charity Navigator had the two little wheels right now of finance and governance, but it's at least something to look at. So donors are so there's a debate going on amongst the thought leaders. One camp is saying, abandon all hope. Donors don't care about this. They never will. It's all going to be about passion forever. That they say this, but they do this. They say 90%, but they do this, and it's always going to be that way. Then there's the second school. The second school says, what are you talking about? Before we can solve this debate, you need to start providing the evidence. Then let's go see. Then we'll test your hypothesis. But first, put your money down there and let's just go see, because everything that I've seen at Charity Navigator indicates to me that donors want this stuff, and if they had this stuff easily available, they would use it. So imagine, in my remaining 5 minutes in the solution, if we could build a system that was affordable and scalable that could identify these things on demand to frontline staff, strategic information for the leadership of organizations, empowering and engaging the people being served, connecting everyone. So we have a learning network and we share together. We don't hoard information. We learn from each other and we evolve systems to find models that work. And we actually don't find it a burden. We're digging this data. It's not a pain in the rear. It's not just meaningless reporting to funders, but it actually has value in our work and it makes us do better. Imagine that. Guess what? The future is now. We solved it. We cracked the code. Yes, I'm very objective and unbiased in saying that. So algorithm. Why did I come to algorithm from Charity Navigator? For the first 5 years I was at Charity Navigator, I would have this kind of talk. And nonprofits would say to me, we can't afford it. I don't know what you're talking about. It's not going to happen. For 5 years. Then I found algorithm. And for 2 years I said, go look at algorithm, go look at algorithm, go look at algorithm. I didn't get paid by algorithm. I had no skin in the game with algorithm. I had nothing to gain. It was like, it's the only place I've ever seen in the world that did it. And what do? The first thing they do is they go into a field of knowledge and they have social scientists that will look at what is the evidence-based research, if any. And they can do it even if there isn't any, but I can get back to that. But they try to say, here are the models that appear to be working. And then they marry that with data scientists that say, okay, let's use pseudocoding from the social scientists. Let's build a platform where these nonprofits and social sector enterprises can actually use this information to learn about how they can do things. So here is an example. You got a program in juvenile justice, and there's a pre-survey before the program begins or at some discrete point in the program. They enter information, they get it from the beneficiaries before the program starts, they get it from the staff, and based on the data and evidence-based research, they're saying, you know what? The likelihood that this person's going to be rearrested is about 75% based on the data. However, before you start your program, based with your current program, that's what you're going to get. About 75% they're still going to get rearrested. However, if you were to add these three elements that evidence-based research shows work, you're bringing it down to 45%. We're going to tell you that before the program begins based on the pre-survey. And now, after the program is over, they say, here's the results, here's how you did. And this is now a different kind of program, a youth development program. 77% of the youth made significant gains, statistically defined, and it lays it all out. How much it cost per participant, how much it costs per outcome, what is the net promoter evidence, the recommending to friends. And then they have this other thing where they actually look at the beneficiaries' feedback and the staff feedback. Oh, this is interesting that the staff are saying that 60% of they think is a significant amount of time is going to one-on-one staff with youth, but the youth are saying 16%. Now, why is that? Maybe we should have a conversation with our beneficiaries about what's going on here. Maybe we could learn from them. Maybe we need to change the program in some way. Very interesting conversations begin to happen. Here's how significant gains on different outcomes in the program and by participant as well are done. Here's something interesting we learned. Look at this. Pre-survey, some youth scored high. They were high baseline. Others scored low. The ones who scored low, by the end of the program, made significant gains. In fact, they were even doing better, arguably, than some of the high baseline before. Maybe we're creaming. Maybe where there are some people that don't need this program. And if we were more focused. So they're learning from all of this. They're learning about effective practices and how they're scoring on those practices. And then at the end, they get in the report, which there are copies of somewhere.
On the table.
On the table, if you want to look at it.
Copies, so please only
This
take
is
copies.
the second to last slide. So there's a report that says, continue. Here are program activities you're currently doing that are really working well. Keep doing these things. Reinforce. Here are things that you're doing you should do more of. Consider. Here are things that you're not doing that the models show actually could make your program even more effective. So you're learning continuously learning to improve. So it's useful information. It's not just reporting outcomes to a funder. The people who are most excited about this stuff are frontline staff, not just the leadership. And so I also just want to say, when it comes to social business, getting back to social enterprise, that I think that the key to the, I work in a social enterprise, so I'm not against social enterprise. But what I've observed is that there is a lack of respect on both sides. A lot of arrogance on the side of some people in social enterprises that think that NGOs don't have the business acumen and that they're a bunch of bleeding heart fools. And then on the nonprofit side, there's a view that these guys are all about money and profit and really aren't social driven. And I think that there needs to be a mutual respect and learning from each other. We have stuff to learn from each other. I wrote an article called The Nonprofitization of Business, which was basically saying, hey, you guys, usually guys, you need to realize there are some things you can learn and have the humility to know that. We're all early on in learning how to do things right. There need to be standards for these social enterprises, and they need to meet those standards. And there needs to be more of a reality of talking about integrity and ethics on the side of social business and how critical that is if you're going to try to balance profit and social value. And so the other thing I wanted to say about what Algorithm is doing is building a learning community where these small and mid-sized nonprofits can have the advantage of big data by aggregating the data and learning together. So let's suppose you're in a field of practice where there is no evidence-based research, or let's suppose you're in one that there is, but you're doing something that there's no research on. And we find that the results of your program are above and beyond the others. We add that. We build that in. We use that to learn and have the organizations learn from each other. We'll see the organizations that are performing high in an outcome area, and we'll say, you need to go and meet with your peers and train them in the models you're using to get those kind of results, so that as a community, we learn together and build the practice.
Okay.
The last slide. See that? And you notice, I hope you notice the Star Wars theme. I'm very excited about December 18th, but I will not say anything more about that. But my point here is that we need more leaders to be evangelists, advocates, educators, funders for this. We need the academic community. We need future nonprofit leaders and current nonprofit leaders and social enterprise leaders. We need everybody to begin to educate people about this and to get on the right side of this battle and to change the paradigm so that we win this battle. And so it's a plea to you that it's not just this talking head, but that you spread this information out there in whatever ways you can over the course of your careers. So here's some additional literature that I recommend, and hopefully you can get access to this slide. This is more on the subject. 2 of these are written by my colleague. I wrote this one, but there's also some other stuff that's listed here, the Money for Good study, that might be a good place to start as a primer if this is new stuff to you.
And all of these slides will be on our Transnational NGO website, right, after this talk, because I'm going to get them from you, right?
Yes.
All right.
The end. I did it in 45 minutes.
You're just about it. Okay.
Just about. Wow.
It's a little late. So, please, let's use the time. Who wants to go first?
Yes.
Jesse. Oh, Jesse Sheeta?
How much would it cost to produce the report that you...
It's typically $3 per participant, and so if you have 100 kids, let's say, and it's about $400. But the other thing to say, just to clarify, is to do the research, to build it, the system, costs about $100,000. So typically there's seed money from a foundation, a small, mid-sized foundation, hopefully, sometimes a big one, or a governmental body, or an individual, or a group of NGOs come together and collectively help to support the funding of building the system.
When you say build a system, that's a program area, so that would be like recidivism for youth. That would be
Yes,
a program area.
exactly. So for a particular cause area, doing the field of knowledge research, building the coding and the survey tools that are human-centered design for people that are going to fill out the surveys. All of that work costs about $100,000.
How many program areas do you have?
Well, you know, the thing is that the algorithm on October 2nd had its second birthday and ended its startup phase. We are now a maturing organization. So the website is about to be modified. The first area we did was youth development. The areas that are just about built now are juvenile justice and senior centers and capacity building for nonprofits, and also a grant foundation tool. But the goal is to, you know, blow this out and build these tools for everything from homeless services to you name it when it comes to human services and direct services. The longer term vision is just the whole nonprofit, the whole NGO social sector someday. But the point is, you know, it's there, and it's never been there before. Those reports that are on that table, I've never seen anything like that anywhere before. So this is the first time this has ever been presented by me to anybody, this stuff. I never had it. That's why I can now say we can win the battle. Before I was just having the battle.
Sorry, one second, Sheena was.
So my question just piggybacks on that point, because in looking at the winning the battle, I was sort of like, okay, we're winning the battle for the human services sector and not the nonprofit sector, because a lot of the model is about data, evidence, collecting it, which is good in service delivery, but we know that 1.5 million nonprofits are doing a whole lot of other things, like advocacy, right? Those kind of things that don't fit in this kind of data algorithm.
But I think that they do. But
how do we win for the entire sector?
Well, I think that they do. I think that the emphasis and the focus may alter from one to another. But I'll give you a very 50,000 foot example. You're an advocacy organization. Let's suppose you want to change legislation. What is the short-term outcome? I was able to meet with a legislator and educate them on this policy issue. The outcome indicator is not that I changed the legislation. That's not a short-term outcome. But I actually was able to meet with this many legislators, and I asked them afterward if this was of value to them, if it changed their knowledge at least, maybe not their opinion. There are ways to do this. An arts organization, an opera, a ballet company. Have you enriched my experience of this artwork? There are ways, and so beneficiary feedback, constituent voice, I think will play a critical role. I think it's one of the few tools that's a near universal tool that could be used by almost any type of organization. It may not be as deep, it may not be as, it may vary according to its emphasis, but I think that there's an opportunity here. But I also agree with you that I think some of these things are 10, 20 years out. Right now, if we could just get those pesky human service organizations to figure this out, I believe that we could be at a tipping point. Once we get this ball rolling and we find a way to do this for small and mid-sized organizations, and it becomes more commonplace, going from the early adopters to more accepted, then I think we will be better positioned to move this needle further down the road. But it's probably going to be a while yet.
Jacqueline?
I wonder if you could characterize for us your staff. How many of them are there? Are they permanent, contract-based, depending on the field? What is
Yes.
their training? Where do they sit all day?
Yes.
How do they interact with these
Sure.
things that they're measuring?
Sure. And so I want to begin by saying you are teetering very close to where I am dangerous. Remember, I am a less than 2 months employee. Now, I did reading on them before, but I will do my best to answer questions that get into the details of the operation with that warning in place. So we have approximately, I think there are approximately 25 people involved in the organization at this point, and they are spread across the United States, about half of them, and the other half are in the country of Colombia. The Colombia staff are largely the data science tech staff. In the United States, you have more of the social science staff and the management team. Of those, I think at this point there are 8 of us that are on payroll, and the others are in contracting on a contracting basis with a goal to try to convert more and more over time as we can. And so that's a rough breakdown.
And what's their training in the social sciences?
Well,
Evidently not the Columbia folks if they're your data folks.
yeah. I know that a couple of the staff are very deep in youth development because that was the beta tested version. And so they've gone deep into that area. One of them is a PhD and, pulling all the literature. I don't know the details of which school or so forth, but essentially there is that depth of knowledge. Then you have a couple of people who are consultants who are on staff that worked for the TCC group and did a lot of measuring study and building these kind of systems before for nonprofit organizations in the capacity building areas. And that's about as far as my dangerous knowledge can go at this point.
Jacqueline, Lou?
There are so many, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's no problem. Go ahead, Jack.
I was just wondering who evaluates the social value of algorithms, or how they do it, especially if you guys do it internally. How do you make sure that you're being objective?
I think that is a great question, and I think that during its 2 years as a pesky startup, the answer would be nobody. But I do think that over time that's going to be increasingly important. I think there's been, just like with many nonprofits, the implicit assessment from funders. They've had government funders, foundation funders, groups of nonprofit funders, and so it's been anecdotal feedback that they've received about this and renewing the beta tested organizations over the 2 years. But there is going to be a need. When I started at Charity Navigator, we had the same problem, and the board gave me a goal of 3 results, and I said we needed to build a 4th. I won't torture you with the 3, but the 4th I added was that we need to walk the walk and talk the talk, and we need to be a role model for that which we're asking others to do. So I do think that algorithm is going to need to build tools to measure itself in the same way it wants these other organizations to measure, but we have not gotten there yet.
When we did the interview this morning, one of my questions was, how will algorithm know that you're effective, right?
Yeah.
So, look, that was the other, not the one that you did, but so have a look at that on the website in about a week's time.
Yeah.
Lou?
There's so many, I'm a sociologist, there's so many sociologists who would be delighted to think that their work could be useful.
Yay!
Economists and even, no, there are so many academics would find wonderful if somebody would use what they're finding out. And they might even volunteer. They'd be very happy. And I think you should talk to, go to these professional associations, say, we could use your data.
We're going to be attending the American Evaluation Association conference this year. We're going to be attending the Arnova conference this year. We're trying to get the word out wherever we can, where people will talk to us.
So maybe you can connect.
Yeah, so please.
Some of the other conferences.
Yeah, please.
Jacqueline, again, let me just check if nobody else wants to. No? Okay, if you don't mind, Jacqueline, first.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Hi, my name is Keely Hansen, and I'm an MPA student here at Maxwell. And I thank you for being here and for your presentation. I have multiple questions, but the one that I'd like to ask is related to kind of this data-driven shift that I know that's been ongoing, but you really see, at least for me, I've seen really expanding at a really rapid scale within the nonprofit sector.
Yes.
My background's predominantly within education.
Right.
And while I definitely see the value in data-driven, nonprofit culture and all the benefits that come with that, I guess what my question is how do we ensure that data and tying how we fund, right, or how nonprofits get the funding to do their mission, motive, and all of those things doesn't necessarily come at the expense of the beneficiary? for example, like in a nonprofit, in an education sector, right? I've seen data manipulation where I can give a student who I'm trying to assess their reading level. If I'm a nonprofit and I give you Shakespeare's such and such as your first primary reading example that you have to read to me, and I'm going to test you for your oral reading fluency, and then the second one that I give you is the little red tricycle goes down the lane, you can see that you're going to see this incredible data that's going to come out and be very influential. However, if I'm the student and I'm looking at my reading score, I'm traumatized. And so those are the kinds of things that for me I was always really conflicted in terms of data and nonprofit, so I'm wondering what your take is.
So let me, I don't know how, if this is going to entirely cover it, but I did, once in my career, never to be repeated, we did a 3-act play, and it was called The Beggar, The Alleged Beneficiary, and The Wizard. And the beggar was a nonprofit, the wizard was a foundation, and the alleged beneficiary was the alleged beneficiary. And it was supposed to be the history of the nonprofit sector. And in the first scene, the beggar goes to the wizard and says, please give me money to help to serve the beneficiary. And they pour coins in, and then there's a big machine called the service delivery system, and the beggar pours the coins into the machine, drags the beneficiary, and it pops out, the beneficiary pops out the other side, and it has a sign that says output, activity. Scene 2, so that's like the whole past of the nonprofit sector. Scene 2, present day. And the beggar goes to the wizard and says, please give me money. And the wizard says, no, you must, I will not give you money for outputs. You must provide outcomes. And only with that, because the thought leaders have thought big thoughts. And we've read all the literature from academia. And we have to have outcomes from you. And the beggar says, wow, that sounds hard. Could you give me some more money for that? No! You should have been doing this all along. It's your fault. Go now! And so he goes, drags the beneficiary, and the beneficiary pops out the other side, and again comes out with a little sign that says output. And the wizard says, what are you doing? I said I want an outcome. Where is my outcome? And the beggar goes over, erases output, and writes outcome. And the wizard's saying, you just erased it. No, look closely. And the wizard stares, says, oh yes, we call it an outcome, and therefore it's an outcome. We win, hooray! It's an outcome. And that's what's going on today in the vast majority of the nonprofit sector. I said 5% are doing it, 90% are being asked to do it, and if you read the reports, they're doing it. Why are they doing it? Because they involve kabuki dance, shape-shifting, and otherwise smushing things and calling outputs outcomes, right? So it's this bogus dance. So your worry about data being manipulated, and I think we're at a pivot point. I think it's very real. There's a tremendous danger that the 1% is going to jargoneer and manipulate data and claim that it's something meaningful when it's really crap, right? So that's a very real challenge that we face. It's very real. And it's also very real that if it's a top-down system that's created that doesn't engage the beneficiary, it's going to be this elitist stuff that is largely meaningless, that doesn't really help anybody. So I'm with you 150%. And so how do we solve that? How do we win that battle? I think it's going to be a battle. It's going to be years of slogging away at this. And those of us who are willing to speak truth to power and not be afraid to offend big foundations and not be afraid to offend big nonprofits and even have it be a hard lesson for mid-sized and smaller nonprofits, we're going to have to just slog at this and seek truth. And so what does that mean for you? You're in an organization, algorithm comes along and says, look at this cool tool. I think your attitude needs to be, show me, prove it to me. I'll try it for cheap. I'll spend a few $100 on one program first. Let me see if my beneficiary is really, if it's really measuring what matters from my personal experience. So remain skeptical. Don't trust me. Trust yourself and check it, and you have very healthy and wise skepticism.
So in the ideal world, right, where algorithms, like the things that algorithm is putting out there are getting consumed and used, eventually do we see a nonprofit sector where all the nonprofits are internally doing what algorithm told them to do? Do we see a nonprofit sector where there are a bunch of kind of equally reputable but rival organizations to algorithm that
Yeah.
are popping up, or do we see a sector that everybody goes to algorithm and algorithm holds the key?
Yes, it's algorithm becomes the 1% and rules the world. No, I would hope, in view of my values, that it would never be that way, but it would be the other way, which is that as this model becomes more accepted and others explore similar models, like I know Acumen is looking at something called lean data. So there are some efforts that may or may not, I mean, it could end up being just a big fancy a new way of repackaging to get expensive consulting work. I don't know, but I think eventually there will be some other players that will be building similar systems. So, I mean, you know, there's so many cause areas. For algorithm to do it alone, it could take years. If we have other partners, we can be complementary and competitive. Yeah, I hope that this will proliferate and there'll be others.
Sorry, you were waiting.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Berger, for coming here and doing this. My name is Jameson Crawford. I'm an MPA at Maxwell and concentrating in nonprofit management. And I'm all for this. In fact, I'm just about to go to Dr. Alisi's data-driven management class right now and take a quiz. But the question.
Well, you better get an A. If he doesn't give you an A,
I'm a little worried about it, but I spent the afternoon working hard. But thank you. So my question is that so you're talking about cognitively, kind of very cognitively empathic people, the utilitarians who look at the data-driven analyses that you have in there. Peter Singer's book, The Most Good You Could Do, he talks about effective altruism and how those utilitarians who are thinking, being empathic cognitively, they're giving out the large donations, but still there's people who are more emotionally empathic.
Yeah.
And they are kind of like, you know, very attracted to the commercials that are, you know, that are more anecdotal rather than data driven, zooming in on puppy's eyes with Sarah McLachlan singing in the background and
Yeah.
so on. So is there still room for that, do you think, in the sector
Yeah.
in terms of
So-
raising money? How do you think that we can combine them?
So could I ask, could you do me a favor?
Sure.
Could you write something down?
Sure.
Here's what I'd like you to write down. It's an article, and I'd like you to read it if you would. And feel free to email me after you read it. It's called the elitist philanthropy of so-called effective altruism. So check it out. So anyway, the bigger answer to your question is, I am not, and I don't think algorithm is in any way saying that we take the heart out of philanthropy. What we're looking for is a marriage of the head and the heart. We never want to get rid of the passion and the heart and the emotive connection that people have to different causes. We are not interested in having a cold, effective altruism. We're looking for both. Storytelling is often very heart-based, it touches the heart, it's very granular. It will always be important to make it live and real for people. What we need is to also have the head involved and data that sits behind that, and that a person is passionate but also has a certain level of healthy skepticism or looking for data to make sure that it overlays and it connects with their passion for this particular organization. And if not, that there's an alternative organization that can also, they could wrap their heart around, but has, you know, is a double whammy. It has both.
Others?
All right, see, so we've covered it all, and now you know how to win the battle.
No other questions?
So go out there
I
and win.
I think that a couple of people want to probably ask a couple of questions, so you have time till for another 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
So I want to thank you very much. I
My
think
pleasure.
everybody found it really interesting. I know I certainly did, so thank you.
Thank you.